Good evening, everyone. I'm John Conley, Director of International Space University's 29th Space Studies program. Welcome to tonight's panel session that explores new trends in space education. I'd like to thank our sponsors, first of all, as you see up here on the board, who make many of these events possible. An important responsibility of the world space agencies, commercial space companies, and academic institutions is to inform, inspire, and engage the public about the latest advances and discoveries in the space sector, and to develop programs that will inspire and help young people pursue careers in science and technology, like many of you out there. As we begin the second century of flight, we must remain committed to excellence in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM education, and ensure that the next generation of explorers can accept the full measure of their roles and responsibilities in shaping the future. Education for future space exploration can play a key role in preparing, inspiring, exciting, and encouraging the young minds of today who will be the leaders and pioneers of tomorrow. The Space Education Panel features experts who each day lead activities to inspire and motivate students to ensure the existence of a qualified workforce and to ensure progress in future space activities. I'd like to now introduce our moderator for this evening, NASA's Associate Administrator for the Office of Education, Donald James. Since his appointment in 2014, Donald has been responsible for developing and implementing NASA's education programs that strengthen student involvement and public awareness about the scientific goals and missions. In this role, he leads the agency in inspiring interest in STEM subjects through NASA's unique mission, workforce, facility, research, and innovation. Please help me welcome Donald James.
Thank you. I have one of these on. It sounds like it's on and working. Thank you very much. Well, I'm really happy to be here to a standing room only crowd in this big auditorium. That's really wonderful. Thank you for sacrificing whatever it is you were going to do in order to be here. This is my second visit to Israel in less than a year, and I'm just delighted to be back to join my colleagues up here. We're going to have a conversation about education and space exploration and STEM. You heard that. In the United States, we talk about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. I always wondered why the scientists got to go first. I mean, if the mathematicians went first, it would be meat, right? Or meats. And if the technology would be teams. And so anyway, it's just scientists, I guess, think highly of themselves, but we like scientists. The way this is going to work is that I'm going to give a very short introduction to my esteemed colleagues up here. They will then have 5 minutes to offer some prepared remarks on the topic, and we have quite a diversity up here. Speaking of diversity, I want to acknowledge my first mistake. You can obviously tell that we all come from one gender. That's my fault, so I take full responsibility for not realizing that I did not insist on having any women on the panel, so I just want to acknowledge that. Especially since a lot of what we're trying to do, at least in our space agency, is to make sure that young women and girls aspire to be a part of space exploration in a variety of disciplines. So it's a little ironic that I blew it on that one. So my panelists are going to say a few words. They can expand a little bit on who they are. And then I have a couple of questions, and we're going to have a discussion on this topic. But the main star of the show will be you. At the end, we will have plenty of opportunity for questions and answers. There will be people on either side of the auditorium with microphones, and you can ask your questions, and then we can explore this topic. So without further ado, from your left to the right, it's my honor to introduce Dr. Chris Welch, who is a professor of astronautics and space engineering with International Space University and the International Astronautical Federation Vice President for Education and Workforce Development. Yes, pause it. Thank you. You deserve it. And next to him is Mr. Haim Russo, who's chairman of a nonprofit organization that bridges between the Israeli education system and the industry, including hundreds of space-related projects. So really great boots on the ground kind of experience in this topic. So please welcome Mr. Russo. And then to my left, it's my honor. You've probably seen him before if you were at the Buzz Aldrin talk. He introduced Dr. Aldrin. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Pini Gurfil, who's the director of the Asher Space Research Institute here at the Technion. So please welcome Dr. Gurfil. And last but not least, only because he's the youngest, is a dear friend of mine, Dr. Matthew Daniels, who is a NASA engineer, an actual real rocket scientist, and also a research affiliate with Stanford University. Matt is, and this is the only deviation that I'm going to make in terms of introductions. I've known Matt since he was 15 years old. He was a young man who wanted to intern with us, and I wasn't sure about that, and his mother talked me into letting him come in. And he's been one of the absolute best bets that I've made and the agency's made. He's what we call at NASA a true rock star. So please help me welcome Dr. Matt Daniels. Great. So first up is Chris. So 5 minutes, please. I'm going to try to watch the time here with my Apple Watch. You got, oh, good. All right. Israeli 5 minutes. Oh.
Oh, it's an Apple iPhone 5 minutes. So, most of you out there, I think, know me, but some of you don't. As Donald says, I'm a professor with ISU, and I'm based in Strasbourg in France. But I have a number of other hats as well. Donald mentioned one of those. I'm currently the Vice President for Education and Workforce Development for the International Astronautical Federation. And I was very pleased to be elected when, in fact, the IAC was in Jerusalem. So I have very positive feelings about the IAC in Jerusalem. And that means I'm responsible for overseeing all of the Federation's activities, as you would imagine, in education and workforce development. Another hat, I have a number of hats. I'm also a Vice President of the British Interplanetary Society. The reason for that being relevant, I will come back to later on. Now, my own particular trajectory into space, probably a bit geeky, started off reading science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke, Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, the kind of classic ones. I did physics, then I did space physics, and then I kind of moved over into engineering. And now if people ask me what I am, I'm not entirely sure, and I have a tendency to say I am a spacist. Okay? That's the way, and I think that's why I, fit in very well, I think, at ISU, and I think the majority of us here are spacists. What we're really interested in is space, and we have a number of ways that we sort of articulate that interest. And so we are a community who believe in ISU's credo of a boundless, prosperous future for humanity in space. And then the question, I think, is how do we educate the rest of the world? And I can divide the rest of the world conveniently into three chunks, maybe. There's the general public. If we want to go and explore space, if we want to settle in space, if we want to move out across the solar system, who knows, build giant, artificial rotating space stations. Some of you are kind of busy on that at the moment. We need to engage the public. We need to convince them that this is interesting, it's valuable, it's relevant to them. We need to engage them there. Also, there are the people who, shall we say, control the resources. Politicians, maybe, government officials, but equally investors. And we need to inform them about why space is important, so that they see the value of it either in financial terms or in terms of the benefits to the society and the people who vote for them. And then lastly, we need to, if we're going to do things in space, we need to have people to do them. And ISU is obviously a good source of those people, but we need to find other people. And we need, if you like, I hesitate to call it a conveyor belt, but it's a little bit like that. We need to get people engaged with STEM, STEAM at an early age, and we need to move them through the educational system, through the university system, out into jobs, out into employment, so we have people. And that's what workforce development ultimately is. It means making sure that we have the people to do the jobs that we see need doing. And I think the common thread for me through all this is imagination. I think that's the fuel for the rocket, for the trajectory that lifts people. Ludwig Wittgenstein, the kind of Austrian-British philosopher, said, that which cannot be imagined cannot be talked about. And I think that's a very fundamental aspect of what we need to try and do, is we need to build on the imagination. If it's for school-age students, we need to get them to imagine that that maybe science is interesting and not boring. If it's members of the general public, we need to get them to imagine that they could go to Mars, that they could be part of a kind of participatory space exploration. If we're trying to convince politicians, we need to get them to imagine the possibilities. Because if you can't close that imagination gap between what people currently think is possible and what we think is possible, we're never going to take everybody with us and be able to do the things that we need to do. So the link to the British Interplanetary Society then is that the Society's motto has been for many decades, from imagination to reality. And I think that encapsulates it very nicely. Thank you very much.
Yes, Mr. Russo.
Yeah. Good evening. I would like to talk a few minutes about space education related to education in schools, mid-level, high school, boys and girls. I'm involved in that in the last 2 years. Before that, I spent 40 years in the industry, but this is a different story. A major challenge in education, in technical education in school today, as I say it, is encouraging the young children to go into study STEM-related issues. I think you all know that there is a trend in all the developed countries in the last few years that every year we have less and less children, boys and girls, that choose STEM studies as their major in the future. And there is no doubt that with this trend, at the end of the day, we will see the impact on the growth of economies, industries, whatever, in countries. Now, in order to react effectively, to be able to do something in order to change this trend, you have to understand what is behind it. Now, there was a survey that was published 2 years ago, I think, which asked thousands of children, right, in something like 50 countries, developing countries and developed countries, boys and girls, what do you think about STEM, science and technology? How much is it important for the national level? And the results were very nice. Something like 4 out of 5 was the results. Everyone thinks that this is very important and has a lot of contribution. Now the next question was, do you want to be a scientist or an engineer? And the results were very interesting. In developing countries, the answer was yes, 4 out of 5, 80%, very nice results. If you go to the developed countries, it's maybe 2 out of 5. Yeah. And girls even much less than boys. So we see it as a trend, and we try to explain it in a way so it's not a rational issue. They all understand the importance, but they don't want to do it. Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it doesn't touch their sentiments or or whatever. So we think that if we need to do something, we have to work on the emotional side more than on the rational one. We need to stimulate their enthusiasm, to inspire passion or things like that in order for them to be more involved. And in the organization where I'm chairing now, we are trying to react to that. And according to that, to try to understand how we can trigger, stimulate the interest and their enthusiasm in that. And we found that there are two points. One, they have to be involved, not just by sitting in a class and having lectures. On the job, hands-on experience. They have to interact with the real world, with the engineers, with the scientists, with the labs, with the production line. They have to be involved in real challenges, not theoretical things, real challenges, to try to find solutions, real needs, and to be more active in their interaction with the world with regards to science and technology. And the second point we need to focus on areas which attract young children, the children. And then what we decided to do is first to work very closely with the industry. And that's the main motive of our activities. We bridge between industry and education system, because in the industry, they can find everything. They can see the engineers, they can see the labs, they can do projects, they are involved in solving real dilemmas. And the second point, we came to the conclusion that there are two subjects that attract the young generation. One is robotics, and second is space. And that's why we decided to develop projects between industry and the education system based on space. We have hundreds of projects, hundreds of classes involved in that, thousands of children every year, more and more. We see the results. They are enthusiastic about these things. So when we speak in the school, space education, it's not necessarily in order to generate the new experts, the new engineers in space. Yeah. Space for us is more a tool or a way in order to bring STEM to the children.
Great, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. A lot of great messages. Dr. Gurfil, please.
Hi. In addition to being the director of the Usher Institute, I'm also a faculty member in the Aerospace Engineering Department here at the Technion. I've had experience educating students ever since I started working at Princeton University. It was in 2000, yeah, quite a while ago. And then when I moved to the Technion, I was fortunate to educate both undergrad and graduate students, quite a few of them. And I also teach astrodynamics and space-related courses in China. So I think I have a pretty global perspective on space education on the academic level. But in addition to that, we are also conducting a lot of outreach activities, and we're in the Institute, and we are supervising high school kids that are doing space projects. So what I would like to contribute to the discussion is just a perspective, basically two main points. One is, how do we actually implement space education? Whether STEM-related education is enough, or do we actually need to provide hands-on experience? And the other perspective is actually the globalization of space education. Because what we're seeing now is a shift in the traditional paradigms of how space education is being performed on the academic level. We're moving from classroom-based education to web-based learning. This has been a dilemma for academia for the past few years. And the other issue is how do we actually implement space education? How do we actually carry it out in this changing environment of the world, going from studying in classrooms to actually doing things on the web? And we're seeing young kids, high school kids, that are asking us very difficult questions. Why do we actually need to go to the STEM direction? We can do everything with simulation and the computer. You know, you press a button and you get a rocket launched. Can we do it in the real world as well? So it's really a challenge for educators these days to provide the message for young students and older students alike, and to explain that while the world is changing, the way that we educate our students is changing, still there are some fundamental disciplines that we need to be persistent on, and we need to teach. What I want to say in addition to that is that we also are not sure whether project-based education, such as building a nanosat, would be more beneficial than educating the students with the fundamental disciplines of science and technology and engineering, math, physics, and so on. What I want to say is that actually the first Israeli nanosatellite that was launched was built by high school kids, 16-year-old guys from the Herzliya Science Center. And although we have numerous visits in the institute, by far the brightest visitors I had were these high school kids. They're really proficient with how to build a satellite, how to do the communication system, how to integrate the edit control, but they do not understand how it actually works. They have the experience, but they don't have the fundamental knowledge. So it's, again, we have to, I think, bring it up in this discussion, is how do we compromise between hands-on experience and the fundamental sciences.
Thank you. That's great questions and points, and look forward to exploring it some more. So thank you. So we'll keep it even. Yes. Thank you. And last but not least, Dr. Daniels. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. One note, and thank you, Donald, for having me here. One note that Donald left off in his story was that when I started at NASA when I was 15, I was so excited at the prospect, at the possibility of working at NASA, and so terrified at an interview being between me and possibly getting to work at NASA that I showed up for my interview with Donald about 2.5 hours early. And then I got really bored, and so eventually I called Donald and asked if he would come out and meet with me a little bit early, and he actually graciously came out about 2 hours early and took the meeting 2 hours early. Because I was stuck outside the gate.
I forgot about that.
I have actually 3 very straightforward and relatively simple points. And the frame for all 3 points actually comes from Arthur C. Clarke, which is, I think of a distinction between space exploration and space science. I think of space exploration, I think the way Arthur C. Clarke would describe it is that it connotes a more expansive energy than just testing hypotheses. So my 3 thoughts about education relate to how do you sort of build on that expansive energy, or build that expansive energy into young people and give them a sense of how to do that. So my 3 comments are actually, one's for space programs, one's for both students and space programs, and the last is mostly for students. The one for space programs is give students, young researchers, interns, postdocs, too much responsibility. So think of how much responsibility you should give to a student in your lab, and then give them a little bit more, and let them make a few mistakes. They'll learn from it. You might lose some lab equipment, but it'll be worth it. The second point is for both space agencies and students, which is the value of mentors and mentorship. So for students, what that means is get to know a lab director, a professor, reach out to them more often than when you just need letters of recommendation. For lab directors, that means setting aside some times for lunches. But again, the value of actually getting to know how someone else made a career in science is incredibly important. So the value of mentorship, which I benefited from Donald at many points. And the final point is mostly for students, which is thinking about the value of essentially trying new things and challenging yourself. So if you are in a lab and you're doing work that you're comfortable with, something's wrong. So make sure that you are sort of uncomfortable when you get opportunities to work at space agencies or to work in labs, and that you are actually doing something which feels terrifying in some way, because that means you're growing. That's my 3 points.
Well, we heard from a variety of perspectives, and I'd like to talk about a couple of these things. Just a short commercial break. Some of you may notice that there's some things on the table up here. You can't take them until you finish the lecture and the discussion. Then you can come up and take the NASA swag that I brought. But you have to take all of it, because I really don't want to take it back to the United States with me. So anyway, that's what that is, and you're welcome to have some. Let's just dig a little deeper, if we can, on this question about skill sets and capabilities and experience. Pini, you talked about the experience versus the theoretical, and is it either or? In terms of this context of space exploration and thinking about, what kind of capabilities are we going to need in 10, 20, and 30 years, recognizing, of course, that we don't even know what kind of jobs or industries are going to be around. I mean, when I was Matt's age, there was no Google driverless cars, there were no iPhones. I mean, so we know that that's probably going to change. So can we just drill down a little bit more into that question, and then maybe have some of the others pick up on that, on this issue of experience versus theoretical, and in terms of how you see in the future?
Yeah, I mean, the basic question is whether in 20 years from now we'll still have space engineers, or whether people that are doing computer science will be able to design a spacecraft or a satellite. That's a basic question, I think, in aerospace engineering and most of the engineering disciplines. And I don't have an answer to this question. It's too far down the road, but definitely what space can offer younger students is the dream, is the enthusiasm. We just met a couple of days ago a guy that was a moonwalker. So no matter how you try to envision space in 20 years from now, we'll still have people that are actually doing EVAs, and this is the most fascinating thing I think ever. So still we can use space as a tool, as Haim mentioned. The question is, how do we steer it, and where do we steer it to? And the questions that you just raised is a very general question. It's not only space education, it's an engineering education in general. Yeah. Do we emphasize basic disciplines or the high-end aspects, hands-on experience, and so on? My personal view, of course, is that it should be a holistic approach. We try to do as much as we can. There are some institutions that are now transforming their education. They're educating instead of bottoms up, like the fundamental disciplines, and then building stuff the other way around. For example, in Delft University in the Netherlands, you're from there? Great. So it's true, right? You start with a project, and then you go along with it, and through the project you actually gain understanding of the fundamental disciplines. There are some other institutions, like in the States, MIT and so on, when you actually start with the fundamental disciplines, and then you try to grow. So both approaches are okay. My own personal view is that the Delft method is better, especially in this transforming world where trying to explain, differential equations, it's much harder than showing the satellite and nanosatellite to someone and explaining how it works. So I think the world of education is changing direction to this hands-on experience. I think it would be better. There's, of course, just a speculation.
So, Chris, you've taught a lot and you've seen a lot of students. I mean, what are your thoughts about that? So you're responsible for educating young people for things in the future that we're not even sure, particularly in the space arena, that's our framework here, we're not even sure what we're going to need. And so how do you think about those things as an educator in your right?
I think there's two aspects. One, I agree that project-based engineering teaching is better. It's more complicated for the institution to do because you need a lot more resources. But the advantage you have there is you don't get locked into any one particular curriculum. You can give somebody a project, and it can be any sort of project, a conventional one or a futuristic one, and then they will have to go away and find out what they need to know. I think more broadly, I mean, we know that you can't predict the future, but you can try and provide people with a toolkit for the future. And I'm probably betraying a certain amount of preconceptions, but to come back to Arthur C. Clarke again and science fiction, the first place I ever read about an iPhone, okay, was in an Arthur C. Clarke science fiction book. It wasn't called an iPhone, it was called a mini-sec. And it was in a book called Imperial Earth that he wrote, but it was basically this. And so he had envisioned through fiction, you know, a lot of things, and in fact, as a futurist, he was, you know, outstanding. So I think at the same time as the kind of more formal education, we need to be providing people with the tools to think about the future so that they can be suitably flexible and adjust and find out for themselves what it is they need to learn as they go forward.
Okay, Haim, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I fully agree with the concept of project-based learning, which we'll have to adopt both in schools and in universities. But there is another point that I think that has to be changed in the way we teach technical studies, STEM, again, both in schools and universities. Today we teach each different subject on a different way. We have electronics and mathematics and physics and mechanics, different faculties, different courses. We are going, and space for sure is one of the examples, not what we call multidisciplinary, it's interdisciplinary. It's more than it. It's the interaction between the different disciplines. And this has to come from the way you teach the student. It will not come just from experience, from working, from getting experience in you work somewhere. And my understanding is the revolution at the way universities are structured in general, the structure of faculties and things like that. This is a barrier, to my understanding, and I'm not an expert, but in my view, this is a barrier today, and something has to be done even on the structure level in order to be able to train and to educate our future scientists and engineers in a better way in this respect.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think to really try to, come up with one single way is probably our first mistake because of the dynamics of change and how people learn and things of that nature. I wanted to press Matt a little bit because you raised an interesting point about, for the students, putting yourself in a situation that's perhaps a little uncomfortable. I certainly remember being in situations like that. Can you think of one or two examples? You're the most recent one out of school, I think it's fair to say. What's one thing you remember being put in a situation where you went, oh gosh? But it stuck with you in that you feel that it's important for your own learning.
I have a real one, and then there was one long one, which was getting a PhD, which you kind of have to just stick with it, and it's kind of a muddling through process. Okay, but more realistically, which actually gets to a point that I wanted to make anyway, which was when offered opportunities, particularly in the space community, I think the important thing to have in mind is a mentality of paying it forward. So to the extent that everyone in this room has an opportunity to be here, which is a good opportunity, that the way that you repay that is by giving someone else an opportunity later. And one of the ways to start building that as a habit is, actually sort of the topic of our panel, is education, is giving talks whenever you can. At schools, explaining things to your family, to siblings, giving public lectures. So I think some of the things that were uncomfortable for me at first were when I was in graduate school, also signing up to do public lectures. Sometimes sort of at the undergraduate level when I was a grad student. Talking for middle school students is fantastic because everything you say, they love. The questions are usually things like, that was really cool, could you tell us a little bit more? When you're sort of like a first or second year master's student and you're talking to juniors or seniors, undergrads, they ask you slightly harder questions and you have to think a little bit more because otherwise you're going to be that really dumb grad student. So it's a little bit more challenging, and it's both worth it personally because I think, this was kind of just touched on before, there is value in being able to be articulate about space exploration, about the value of space exploration, about what excites you about space exploration. This is a habit to cultivate that will help you anyway, but it also happens to be the way that you repay the opportunities that you've been given. So it's good on a lot of levels, and the first few times you do it, it can be kind of frightening and challenging.
Yeah, got it. That's good. So I'd like to just pull on one aspect of this STEM thing, again, science, technology, engineering, and math, and then we'll chat a little bit about it. Then I'd be interested in hearing what our audience has to say or ask. My experience is mainly from the United States, where we have spent many years focusing on that. Why? Because many years ago, I forgot exactly when, there was some research done that showed that American students weren't competing as well in these subjects with their counterparts around the world. Oh boy, we can't have that. So they wanted to do something about that, and so the emphasis was, let's increase our investment in the sciences and engineering and math, and that was sort of the big effort. There are these international tests that are done, and they compare American students against from Singapore and China and all that stuff, notwithstanding whether or not the methodology can withstand heightened scrutiny in terms of what that actually means. That was the focus and the effort. I think in recent years, what we're discovering in NASA is that we've sort of turned STEM into this thing like it's cool, like you're a STEM person versus a not STEM person. Or in order to have the good jobs and to get paid well and to be in the cool side of the club, you got to do something in STEM. I think where we blew it is that, particularly with respect to space exploration in the big picture, is that it's really the province for many disciplines and a lot of people. I've actually talked to people. In fact, when I was in Jerusalem last October, I just chatted it up with a young lady who was working there. She wasn't even a part of the event. She was staffing the thing, and I asked her, I said, well, what do you think about all this space exploration stuff and, you know, this STEM stuff? She said, oh, that's not for me. That's not my thing. And I said, well, what is your thing? And she said, well, I'm into psychology. And I said, well, that's very interesting, because do you have any idea who is probably going to determine a lot of how we're going to get astronauts to be able to go to Mars, which takes about 5 or 6 months, and be able to stay on the planet and work and get them back and not kill each other? The psychologists are probably going to be the ones to say, here's how you pick the crew, here's how you paint the interiors, here are the exercises you're going to have to do. But yet this young woman believed that this wasn't for her because she was in psychology. And I had other examples too. So I think that we kind of blew it with this STEM thing. And so the question is, now we're talking about adding more letters to the alphabet. A for STEAM, for either arts or architecture, or D at the end for design. I even learned today that in Israel they have something called I-STEAM, for I is for innovation, but it can double for Israeli, or it could be I am the one who is doing this. So next thing you know, the whole alphabet's going to be a part of it. So what do you think about that? I mean, good thing, bad thing, does it matter? Are we screwing up the whole point? What do you think?
I like very much the concept of the STEAM, of the additional A.
You like that?
For art.
Okay.
For art. I think this is something that we have to add, and it had many, many aspects. It's not only psychology, it can be ethics, it can be many other things which are related to more soft, let's say, soft things, which has to be, again, it's part of the concept of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. So the things are more complicated than just, these 2 or 3 disciplines of science. But on the other hand, I suggest not to complicate the thing too much, because we will add more and more letters, we will miss the concept. Now, it's a message. You say STEM today, maybe STEAM is still okay. Try to complicate it more and to add more things.
So what's the message though? Because see, I think that's what's important, is not losing the core message. What is that?
What is the message?
Yes.
Oh, the message is the technical aspects. I think it's science, it's technology, engineering, and math. These are the core. Not necessarily these are all the aspects. There are many. I think by adding the art, we add in general many other soft things without saying any specific. It can be a design, can be other things, ethics, psychology, things like that. Let's keep it STEAM.
What do you think?
I think we should add a C for context, because most of the students that take science, technology, science, engineering, math, and so on are not familiar with the context. Well, what are they going to do with it during the next step? So context is important. Now, there's the issue of knowledge growing exponentially. So it's really a huge challenge for me as an educator to actually invent new stuff for my students to do. It's really a challenge.
Yeah.
So unless you really provide a context, young age, context could be imagination, it could be innovation, but it has to be something that is beyond traditional disciplines of STEM. STEM would be ineffective.
Yeah, that's good. Chris or Matt, you want to pile in on that?
Okay, well, I think STEM, I think that's a subset actually of interdisciplinarity. I think it's a convenient acronym for describing certain things in certain parts of education, but it is just another way of being interdisciplinary, maybe slightly less, and I'm in favor of interdisciplinarity. I'm a spacist, I'm an ISU, the 3 I's and all that, so interdisciplinarity is the way to go as far as I'm concerned. And I think, I'm not just in space, I think we are going to see more and more interdisciplinarity in all areas, because the problems facing us in the world are getting increasingly complicated, and many of them are not amenable to just narrow disciplinary solutions. So.
Yeah, got it. You have any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a particular thought on the acronym or whether we change the acronym, but maybe my thought would be, I don't think it's an accident that when we were going to the moon, we broadly, the space community, also produced some incredible art. There was, we've actually framed photography from the lunar surface in ways that people put in galleries and in their homes. We, again, broadly, we commissioned artists to sort of paint the future. And the idea of placing value in a medium where particularly scientists and engineers who are working on technical projects can communicate with the wider public, where space agencies can communicate sort of a vision of the future to the wider public and sort of where these programs are actually going and the wider benefit and the excitement that they can have. Recognizing that there's value in that is important.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess, what I care about most, and how we choose to go about doing that. I leave to people who are smart.
I think that's great, and I'll conclude this part with just two very quick stories that I think enforce this interdisciplinary value. One is that I shared this with colleagues earlier, that I heard this story that when Steve Jobs was running Apple Computer. By the way, does everybody know where he got the idea to get into computers in the first place? This is a plug for NASA. Hint, he got it at NASA. Yes, you read his biography. His dad took him on a tour of NASA Ames in California. He saw his first computer, said, "What's that?" He said, "It's a computer." He said, "That's cool, I want to do that." Then he goes and creates the biggest company in the world, depending on what day you look at the stock market. Anyway, he also told this story that his inspiration for one of the fonts that he developed that became a popular font in Apple was he decided when he was at Stanford to take a calligraphy class, not his engineering or computer science class, and that gave him the inspiration to do that. And I completely forgot what the other story was, so that I might think of it later, but let me stop here. You guys know you're chomping at the bit to ask a question. My request is that you ask it, tell me who you want to direct your question to. If you have no idea, just ask it and I'll either direct it, or you can ask anybody in the panel. And so, yes, who would like to go first? I'll let the microphone people help me out because my eyes are all not that good, so.
My name is Victor, and I think it's more a question to Professor Welch, but generally, if others have an insight, it will be interesting too. One of my hobbies is to bring the space education to adults and general public, right? I'm a part of a group that does various activities. And we always have a problem with bringing in new crowd. We have quite several people who are quite dedicated followers, I would say groupies maybe, but who come to all our events and listen to our broadcasts and so on. But when we arrange something new somewhere, in many cases we don't have as much crowd. The ones who come usually enjoy, but we don't really know how to bring more. Would you or anyone else have an insight about how to bring more adults from general public to these events?
So how to get the public more engaged in this world? Okay. Chris, you want to?
Well, I think you have to be a little analytical about it and say, who is my target group here? What can I do to attract them? Because the general public, although we can classify them as one group, is not one group. Any group of people you can subdivide. Is it mothers with small children? Is it people over 70? Is it people who are interested in the theatre? Is it people who are interested in modern art? And then you look at ways to link to that and find an event that will appeal to that target audience. And you have to actually go out and identify the gaps in the coverage and go, right, now we're going to do something for people over 70. Now we're going to do something for this group. And then start to build a portfolio, a kind of toolkit of approaches for these different target audiences. I think that's the way forward. At the IAC, we have a space education and outreach symposium, and one of the sessions is connecting with non-standard audiences for exactly that reason, so that we can share best practice on that.
Yeah, I would add that it's sometimes how you frame the story. At NASA, we're spending some time on the art of storytelling and how you set up the story. If you're going to talk about, the asteroid that's going to destroy the Earth, maybe people might be interested. Or if you're going to what Chris said, it's too easy to say the general, not general. You have to decide, I think, who your audience is, and then think about the story you want to tell. So I think we communicate a lot via stories, and we are training ourselves within the agency on how to be better storytellers, because that's ultimately how knowledge is exchanged and how the energy of the excitement of something is conveyed to somebody. So I would think about the story part. Anybody, Matt? Yeah.
Yeah, you're probably doing these things already, but it's a good question, so it bears mentioning a couple of things. One is there's a lot of value in just having a sort of steady organization where a couple of people think about outreach to particular groups first, like schools, and then sort of build on those things. So that you have sort of a rotation of volunteers who get good at giving talks, the community gets to know that there are people who can give talks, so when particular communities host events, they know to reach out to you. So sort of building that kind of momentum. The second is timing it with events. So if there's a probe that's doing a flyby in the solar system, if there's a landing, if there's a particular celestial event that's happening, timing it with those is a really good way. And the third thing is getting to know journalists. So essentially make friends with a journalist, or 3 or 5. Invite them always and kind of get them interested, and that helps to build a lot of momentum as well.
Okay, there was a question, yeah, let's see. You first, and then we'll go to this row, we'll go from right to left, or left to right. We'll just work our way down, okay? Yes, Sam.
Okay, so I have 2 questions, so you can choose whichever you want to address. So I'm doing a the girls, they like a lot the activity, but at the end they say, I'm going to go and study history or things like that. So I was wondering if you have an advice about this, like how to motivate high school girls, except like showing them that it's cool to study science. And my other question is, there are more and more kids now that know how to code, or like learn how to code at an early age. And I think it's very easy to lose any touch with the hardware. Like they can make a robot by basically coding a bunch of black boxes and assembling them. So do you have any advice about how to not, to educate them to the hardware part of science and engineering?
Hardware?
As opposed to software,
okay,
only dealing with programming and
so
computers.
Hardware versus software. Did
Yes.
I hear that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. I might defer. On the first part of your question, I just want to acknowledge that all of us up here are extremely well qualified to address the issue of motivating women. Just want you to know that. Remember, I blew it about that part. I can only tell you that what I've heard and what we are doing within NASA is that we believe that role modeling does matter, that, let me give you a specific example. So I was with our astronaut Katie Coleman recently, who was on the space station for a half a year. And she shared this story that what inspired her to want to become an astronaut is she just so happened to be sitting in a lecture hall like this at MIT when she saw Sally Ride. And it was the first time that she said to herself, I could do this. Now, is that the only way to motivate? I don't know. I know Dr. Ride's story was she saw an advertisement in the Stanford paper saying we're looking for astronauts. She said, okay, and she just didn't assume it didn't apply to her, and it did. So role modeling, so we try to do that. I mean, it's not like I go to an all-girls school to try to tell them to become astrophysics. It's like it's much better. Beyond that, I think for us is to question constantly some of, this is what we've been working on within the whole US government with some people, is this notion of unconscious bias. Are you familiar with that concept? Unconscious bias, our conscious biases are when we freely acknowledge that, you know, we have certain prejudices and biases. You may not want to admit it, but you actually know that you have certain biases and prejudices. Unconscious bias is when we really aren't aware of that. There have been studies that have demonstrated conclusively that most people, even girls, when they show two images of people to ask which one is the scientist, they always pick the white guy with the white hair and the lab coat versus anybody else. They always do that. Why is that? Because our imagery from young people, that's what a scientist looks like, right? They don't look like me. I'm not the one that they pick. So unconscious bias is when we do things without thinking about it that has the unintended consequence of excluding certain categories of people because we don't understand particular nature either of the gender or of the class, or it could be a number of things. We have these issues with certain communities in our country that we have to be aware of. So we have to start by just questioning and have challenged our own unconscious biases. And we have to do this. It can be very painful sometimes. But unless we do that, we're going to keep getting the same results, which is we don't have enough women and girls who are pursuing the fields that we need to pursue in order to do the programs. On the second part, maybe you want to address that? Okay, go ahead, please. Yeah.
Just a short story. I have a grandson at the age of 10. A few weeks ago, I asked him, let's suppose that the teacher will come tomorrow and say there are two new courses, each one has to select one. And one is technology and the other is art. How the class will be splitted? In a minute, he said 50-50. Why 50-50? All the girls will go to art and all the boys will go to technology. Age of 10. And I know that in this class, the girls are much better in mathematics and in science and in everything. They are the best people in the school. But still this bias exists in the children at the age of 10, before he could watch TV and read newspapers and read books and all these kind of things. So it's something, the basic, something that we need to do. It's from the very basic to change this concept, which is, in our country here, we do a lot based on role modeling. We started in a company where Avi and myself, we spent many years in El Opez. It's one of the largest companies here in Israel. We started 20 years ago sending our girls, scientists, engineers to schools, to meet girls, to tell their story, their personal story, what they do, how they manage to do things. And I hope that there is some change, but we don't see a drastic change. And it's still an open question.
Pini, did you have any thoughts on her question?
No thoughts, just statistics. When I was a student, we had 3% of female students in aerospace engineering. Now we have 25%. So we are aiming at 50%, even more. We are trying to promote the participation of girl students in open days and outreach activities, and we're working very hard to change that. Because obviously, as Haim mentioned, we believe that the intellectual potential is huge. It's not being utilized. It's damaging not only the Israeli education, but it also damages the economy, I think. And it's an understanding now that this is a crucial issue. So this is, of course, beyond the gender issue. It's just a matter of survival of our society is taking care of that. So it's definitely effort in changing that.
Let's go on to more questions. I know we can spend a lot of time on this. I promised I would go down this row, starting with this gentleman, and we'll work our way down to about 4, I think it was. So, your question, sir.
Yes. Massively open online courses as MOOCs are becoming increasingly popular these days. And I was wondering how your institutions have been using them, or whether they intend to plan to use them in their outreach activities.
Okay. Who wants to start on that? You do MOOCs, Chris? Have you ever done it?
I can comment on that from a kind of Strasbourg ISU perspective, which is that we've considered MOOCs, but to be honest, in Strasbourg there's 25 people, and we have 2 IT people, and we don't currently have the resources to put a MOOC together. We've looked at a SPOC, a small private online course, and that's kind of, I didn't know that acronym either, but I quite like it, a SPOC.
Oh, that's a real acronym.
A real acronym,
Okay.
a small private online course which you can then grow into a MOOC. It's a kind of strange science fiction transformation, SPOC to MOOC. And in our particular case also, I mean, ISU is very much about people and the personal contact. If somebody said to me, you don't need an SSP, you don't need to get all these people together, you can just do it all online, I would say you could deliver some of the information online, surely, okay? But you wouldn't get the personal interaction, you wouldn't get the bonding, you wouldn't get that team learning that you're just starting to tiptoe into in your team projects. So I certainly think MOOCs have a lot of value. Clearly we're going to see many, many more of them. For the institutions that run them, the question is, how do you monetize them? Typically by charging for the qualification at the end. But in ISU's case, we're aware of them, but we're not currently planning to develop a big space MOOC out there just yet.
I would just only say that we're not doing them, we're not supporting them at NASA. A lot of our content is free. People can use them in a MOOC or not a MOOC. We're not actively, I don't know how MOOCizing NASA stuff. I would be more interested in some of the evidence of the research about how effective they are. And I'll be very candid, I'm old-fashioned. I'm a brick and mortar kind of person, but that's just me and my age. So anyway, I lost track of time, John. How much more time we got? I'm sorry. 20 minutes. Okay, great. Thank you. There was someone in this row. I promised this row, so I'm going to do one, her, and then you, and then we'll go in the back. I promise. I'll get there. I'm glad you have questions. This is great. Yes.
Well, actually, my question has been partially addressed already. It was also about role models for women, which we see everywhere in every sector, that it's very important motivation for young girls to go into these sectors. But as Pini mentioned, there is a growth in the percentage of women studying, but the problem still exists in the high levels, and that's everywhere in government, in industry, in the agencies, in academia. When we get to the higher levels, the position where the real role models are, where there we see a lack of women. So my question is, what is being done in the various fields that you are working in to improve that?
Who wants to start? Matt, why aren't there more women in the upper echelons? I get to pick on.
Good gods, I don't know. I mean, I do know, but it's a lot of. I'm not the one to speak on this. It's countless small barriers along the way. My impression has been that the value of role models can't be overstated. So both this question and the earlier question about giving talks for young women and doing outreach for young women, I can't applaud you enough for doing that. And I would encourage you to share your personal stories along the way. So actually kind of about the former question too, I think there's value in not just sort of giving a science talk, but sort of telling a story about a science adventure somewhere along the way, right? Something that made you excited, that elicited wonder, And maybe when you went to a conference or when you sort of got to see something sort of particularly exciting, but a sort of science adventure part of it too that humanizes the story. But most of all, I think just the value of giving those kinds of talks cannot be overstated. That's my main thought.
Really, I'm a little bit surprised why you think at the top level there are not enough women. We have in Germany, the chancellor is a lady. Now we have in the UK. Probably in the US we will have in few months. So I think that in many areas, no, you are Donald. No, I'm no joking. I think that in many areas there is a change. You can see here in this country, and you know it. Take the bank system, all the banks, all the leaders of the banks. So there are many areas, not all of them, maybe less in technical issues, but it will come after that. I'm more optimistic about that than about all the girls in schools that they will decide at the age of 15 and 16 to go and study STEM. The problem is there, I think. Once they will go, once they will study, and they will have enough. In industry, for example, in industry there is not big change. I'm very surprised to hear the numbers of Pini in the university. In the industry, I follow these numbers for many years. It's about the same. An exception is software. In software there are many girls, but in all the other engineering aspects, the numbers are very similar. And I think once we will be able to change it there, then it will diffuse to the top level.
I was surprised at some research at NASA that showed, particularly in Silicon Valley, that there are more women who are rising in the ranks. However, they're leaving sooner than the men are. And when our administrator heard that, he commissioned a study to see if that were true at NASA. And it turns out to some degree it is true. So we don't know the reason why, but I suspect, going back to what I said earlier about unconscious bias, is that there's things that we're not talking about that are difficult questions and difficult things to bring up that could be uncomfortable, that we need to have a conversation about to really look at that. So Silicon Valley is a poster child for not good examples. I mean, everybody drags out the woman from Facebook or the Melissa Meyer from Yahoo and all of that. But there's, 10,000 companies, and I've seen a lot of them. And I see what's happening even with SpaceX. I mean, NASA's paying SpaceX to do a lot of stuff, but when I look at their control room, I'm reminded of 1960s NASA, and I'm like, seriously? So something is going wrong, and we need to spend the energy and time to take a look. So I appreciate the question. Okay, make it quick.
Briefly, well, are you going to have a question, or do you want to add to this point too? Let me add one more thing to this.
He gets to go, and then in the back, and then you're third over. Come on, all right.
Well, so the one of the point about before is the Silicon Valley example. The quality of culture within organizations matters a lot as well. So it's something for everyone to be conscious of the culture within, and especially engineering and scientific organizations, and sort of just how people act. Also the value of professional groups. So in the US we have the Society of Women Engineers and things like that. Whenever you're at an institution that doesn't have something like that, tremendous leadership opportunity to get to create something like that, because you'll grow a lot from doing that too. But my sense is generally growing those kinds of organizations is good because it helps to build the culture more widely in institutions as well.
Strength in numbers. Okay, one more here, then in the back. Don't forget your question. Yeah, was it you or yeah?
No, it was me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So my name is Gary. I'm from SSP16, and I wanted to ask you, Donald, about how can we strengthen the educational ties between Israel and the U.S. If you have anything to say about that.
I didn't quite get that.
Educational exchange of students or ideas between Israel and the U.S.
So we hope to have an agreement with an entity in Israel in order to allow Israeli students to come to NASA laboratories. We currently don't have an agreement to do that. We highly value bringing non-US students as interns into our labs for these important reasons. We think it's important for American students, in addition to their technical knowledge and other things that are important for their development, to learn how to work with people who are from different countries, because we believe that the future of space exploration will be increasingly international rather than decreasing. No nation state, maybe with a few exceptions, are going to be able to take on the grand challenges of Mars journeys or even moon bases or Europa or whatever it is. Even now you'll see in science missions there's science teams that are from different space agencies. So as a skill set, we want American students to know how are Israeli students thinking about systems engineering, how are Indian students doing it, how are Jordanian students, and we have these students in our lab, so that's very important to us. We also think that it can work in reverse, and so we are on a campaign to do that. Now, it's very difficult. And Gary will tell you there's legal issues. I have Congress. I have our U.S. Congress. Well, Mr. James, why are you giving a slot to a non-American? The taxpayers paid for that, and you're giving it to that kid over in Israel. Why is that? You know, and I don't like that. Now, they get to write the rules, and they write the checks. So I have to pay attention to that. But I have a good story, and so far it's stuck. So we're working on it. Ask me next week. Okay, I promise in the back. Who was it? Did you remember? Yes, thank you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ayelet, and in the last 2 years I was the VP of Education at Space.il. And at Space.il we struggled with the same question. How can we increase the number of students that choose STEM education? One of the ideas that I think can help is not focusing on STEM education in the younger ages, like elementary and middle school, but thinking about the general. Not everybody will choose STEM. Not everybody is interested in it, but can we show them how space is related to their lives? And even if you choose art or you choose theater or history, we can show them how space is related to it. So I think maybe one of the key ideas is to take problems. By problem solving in any idea, you can show how space is related. For example, you can talk about solutions that were found by space exploration. For example, ideas in for shoes or for sleeping, baby sense, food. We can show how every single issue in our life or every single subject in our lives can be related to what was found in space.
Yeah, so I hear you saying, so demonstrate the relevance of space to them. So for example, I don't know how many people came from a different place to come here. How many people came from a different place to come here? Let me raise your hands. How many people before you came to Haifa got out your cell phone to find out what the temperature was going to be when you were here? Okay, well that comes from space assets, right? Okay, that was a trick question because I knew the answer already, of course. But she's talking about something, she's saying not really focusing on the young kids per se, but maybe in a broader thing. What do you think about that? Because that was your hypothesis.
First of all, I want to say that the project of Space.il is an excellent example of how you attract children. Huh?
My information technology.
Yeah.
Siri woke up.
think it's an excellent example, SpaceIL program, to how you attract children to STEM.
Yeah.
In my view, this is the main objective of the program. It's very important to get to the moon and everything, but the main objective, in my view, is to attract children, and they are attracted. They are around this program. There are hundreds of thousands of children in many classes doing all kinds of things around this project, and the contribution of the company of SpaceIL is huge. Just to relate to the remark here, at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves why we do it. We do, and we try to bring them to think about space and about technology because we want them to go there. So I think I'm not sure this is for everyone. I don't think we need everyone to be involved in that. But we have to enlarge the number of people who are exposed to this area, and by that we will be able to increase the number of students.
So it's a great suggestion, and I took notes, so I'll take that. A couple more. Let's see. You have the mic? Okay, yes.
Yes. Hi, I'm from the U.S. And
Mazel tov.
I'm not an engineer. And I applied to NASA 3 or 4 years ago as a joke. And I got in, and it was fantastic. And now I want to work in space forever. However, I, like almost all Americans, think that space and dinosaurs and rock and roll are amazing. But I still viewed space as weird, and who does that? So STEM is great, and I studied math, but I still didn't think that space was a legitimate choice for me. As we go through time, space and space technologies are becoming more normal, but we still say things like we're spacist, and we're space nerds, and NASA's still this amazing place. But as you can see with SpaceX bringing the commercial viability of space to the people, it's becoming more of a realistic choice. So how can we further push space to be normal? And do we really want to do that? Because then would we still be spacists?
Well, I liked it. Yeah, I appreciate how you framed that. I hadn't thought about it in that sense. My instinctual reaction is the more normal it can be, I think, the better. I'm very bullish about commercial space, by the way. I think that what we have the potential to do with commercial space is what we did with commercial aviation. You know how aviation got to be the way it is today. Initially it was, prizes and government investments and things of that nature, and then people figured out how to transport people and monetize it, if you will. I think that possibility is there with space. I think the key question is, what's going to happen when the first space tourist gets killed in an accident? That's going to happen. I mean, Branson already lost a pilot with Branson, and so are we going to have the stomach to be able to say, this is part of the danger and risk of doing this? I'm very proud of NASA's position that we are going to invest in the things that no commercial company wants to do because they can't afford to do it, and nobody's going to build a capability to take humans to Mars and back. I mean, it's just not, it's too costly. Now, despite what Elon says, that he has a goal to do all of that, we'll see about that, because I haven't heard about the infrastructure and a few other things. But you know what? I hope he's wildly successful, and I hope he proves me wrong. Maybe that'll free us up to focus on other things that are even far more advanced, like interstellar space travel or something like that. But I think there's always going to be a cool factor about it. I mean, when I was your age, there were no planets that we knew of. Now there are. Perhaps in 30 years, we will have demonstrated that there's life in the universe as we know it. Why perhaps? Why perhaps? Because I don't have the evidence now that it exists right now, so I can't say as a true scientist that it is for sure.
But I would say that the triumph, if you like, of technology is that it makes miraculous things boring. And that's how you know when you've succeeded. Okay? So I can navigate my way around Israel, because somebody's put satellites with atomic clocks in the sky. I can fly to the other side of the world. I can stream YouTube videos. You know, I remember when YouTube didn't exist. I started off computing with bits of cardboard with holes in, you know. This is a miracle in technology, and we have made it boring, and everybody who grows up with one of them nowadays, you know, Generation Z, just assumes that they will have internet connectivity and video and audio on tap. We don't get excited by, oh look, there's fresh water coming out of the taps. We accept that as completely normal. That's not normal. That is a miracle of another sort. And that's how we know when we've succeeded. But, as Donald said, there will always be enthusiasts. And even when space is considered to be normal, I will be, you know, a geeky spacist. So, there we go.
I'm still enthusiastic about airplanes.
Exactly.
I mean, I love getting on airplanes. Couple more? 5 minutes. All right, so quick questions. The quicker the question, the more people. If you go on long, I'll have to cut you off. All right, yes. You're to your right, left, the other right.
Me? My name is Rowie. I'm a satellite operator. We are a big group, and we operate satellites. It's like a couple of years project. We learn about space. We learn about mostly satellites. And there's an odd case where we do the project. We do it like for a couple of years, and then we continue on. We go to universities, we study, and move on. And most of the people, they don't continue in the space programs, not anywhere near it, like at all, medicine and other stuff which are excellent. But my question is, I try to implement more space and to market it, so more people can come. There's like 60% of the group there is girls, and it's kind of hard to tell you the truth. Like they kind of reject it on the first sight, even if it's a small project. After they finish it, they just go and continue with their life. So I'm trying to find a way to market it better for them to continue in space. Do you have any ideas?
Let me just take a quick stab at it in this sense, and I want my other colleagues that, first of all, space is not a discipline or a subject or a career. It's much more three-dimensional. There's a group of little old ladies somewhere, I think in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, that have this, they're seamstresses. They sew. And they look like little old ladies that you see your grandmother. And what are they sewing? They're making spacesuits. They're part of our spacesuit stuff. Are they in the space business? Well, yeah, but they wouldn't have said that several years ago. So I think how we tell the story about this, I think we need to look at that as a beginning point for trying to get at what you're talking about. But let me see, do you have any thoughts on that?
Will you continue in the space area after you finish what you do now, which I happen to know?
Probably.
Okay, so you said probably, not certainly. So I guess you know that's the wrong answer, by the way. You should say definitely. But I think I know what you're saying. It's the same, I think, question Neely asked before. It's a matter of marketing, I guess. Still, we are biased. We have this traditional divisions between men and women. So statistically, probably from your group, more men would go to the engineering career and women would go to other careers, maybe high tech, maybe law, maybe medicine. And it's again a fundamental change of state of mind that we have to do. No easy answers, just hard questions.
I think Ofer had his hand up a while, and can you run down here? I can't forget our host.
So, an Epicurean question. You all talk about space education. Well, we lack on basic education. I'm not even talking about manners, but learning how to learn and the basic skills of reading, writing, articulating our thoughts. So now people are talking about youngsters building CubeSats, like when Matt was 15 or others. That was not long ago. But don't we have to read? No, it's okay. Shouldn't we concentrate on the very basic skills of learning how to learn, learning how to get our thoughts in order, and let school kids do school stuff and keep satellites for grown-ups.
No, on the last part. But I think you're making an outstanding point that we can't forget. I call it the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are widespread, and I would completely agree with that. However, where I depart from you is I think the various things that we do in space exploration, making satellites, whatever, can be a tool to get people engaged, and then along the way with the proper mentorship, they'll understand if you don't know how to explain to your next door neighbor why this thing is important, you are never going to get funded. So you better learn how to talk and write and communicate. And I think if the person is determined to get that spacecraft out there, they will do whatever it takes if they're motivated. But if you just tell them, you need to learn how to read and write, they say, why? Why do I need to know differential calculus? No one's ever explained to me that until I was 40 years old. That's my answer. What do you guys think?
I agree.
All right, 2 against 1. What do you? 3 against 1.
Abstain.
He abstains. You got a half a vote. Matt, you're the tiebreaker. Not a tiebreaker.
I agree with the group up here, but I also think they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, you can have sort of CubeSat projects that are outside of classroom environments. You can have it be sort of on summer work experiences after sort of at the end of the day. In fact, there's a lot of importance, I think, if we're talking about improving education, especially for young people, about having activities at the end of the day that continue to be intellectually stimulating. So there's nothing to say that they're mutually exclusive. I think you can have sort of classroom environments that focus on fundamentals of education at whatever level you're at, and also give people opportunities to grow outside of the classroom environment. And doing those together is probably the most valuable.
Okay, one more, then we'll quit. I know I'm over time. Who's got it? It's over here somewhere. Who haven't we heard from? This man, okay. Yes, sir. You're it.
Hello.
Make it good. You're the last one.
Okay. I'm a physics and mathematics teacher. I teach in high schools and in high school, particular one. And I see my work as the one that changes the way the kids think. And I think that it's very important that I'm a BSc in physics and I have good mathematics training to understand what the kids need and how to change them. And my question is, how do we make real scientists go to schools and teach? And another thing I have to say, I was teaching for religious reasons, an all-girls school in Bnei Brak. It's Orthodox. And the girls were finishing the final exams of the physics for high school in the 11th grade instead of the 12th grade. And really, really big group. They all were overachievers and they did it. And I believe that because they were learning alone, all girls. It's not politically correct, but I noticed it because I teach for many years now, and girls think different. And if you put them with boys, then the class will go the boys' way eventually. And I think that they should be separated. And I think that there should be special programs designed for girls. I think equality doesn't mean, what's the word? Similarity.
All right, I'll tell you what we're going to do. That's for the next panel. We're not going to talk about that, separating boys and girls. It's a great question, but on the issue of how do you get scientists to teach and do a good job, what's the answer? One sentence. What do you do?
Pay teachers good salaries.
Great, yay. Yeah, that's great. All right, Well, I like ending on an applause, so we're going to do that, and because we're out of time. I appreciate the great questions. You have earned your stickers. I do have my business cards up here. If you have any more ideas or thought, I really am interested in them because I'll be happy to respond. I think we'll stick around a little bit if you want to chat, but thank you very much for being a great audience and all that.
Thank you to our moderator, Donald James, NASA Associate Administrator for Education. International Space University Professor Chris Welch. Haim Russo, whose company connects education to industry. Pini Gurfil from the Asher Space Research Institute. And NASA rock star, Matt Daniels. I'd also like to remind you about some upcoming lectures here over the next week. On Sunday night, we have the human side of the Columbia mission, featuring Rona Ramon and John Clark. We have NASA's own Pete Worden coming here on August 2nd to speak about the Breakthrough Initiative. And Chris will be leading the Arthur C. Clarke panel, Where Space Meets Popular Culture, on Thursday, August 4th. And then to finish it off, August 15th, David Levy, noted astronomer, will be here lecturing about a night watchman's journey. So before we adjourn, let's offer our panelists one final round of applause. And I'd like to invite you all to a reception right out these doors, where you can continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone, and good night.